They came to me and said, hey, this is a great role, but to be honest, the CEO's an idiot. Maybe those words are a bit nicer than what they said, but we almost put that in the ad to say the leadership you work with will be extremely hard. Had a little bit of fun with it, but the people who did apply walked in with eyes wide open. And I think 3 years later, they're still there and the culture has improved and some of those things have changed. In the end, it's a relationship, and sometimes some relationships don't work. Breakups are shit, but they don't have to be bad. We can deal with that in the right way and say sometimes the environment, the connection isn't the right one. Everyone's busy, but no progress. Everyone's doing stuff, but no one's doing stuff that matters, or it's stuff that's going in 7 different directions.
Welcome, Deepak, and congratulations on making the final 12 of the HR Influence Awards for 2026. What a great achievement among so many worthy and well-rounded nominees. Well done, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for inviting me, but also giving me this opportunity to be part of this. Like, what a great award recognition and what a great list of names to be associated alongside. So thank you.
Beautiful. Well, Deepak has founded 3 separate HR ventures, Mission and Rhythm, PeopleStack, and Just Sing Out, each addressing a different gap in the profession. He also previously held the senior people and culture roles at Uber Carshare and REA Group, where he shifted Gallup engagement from a meager 25% to the 75th percentile in 18 months. Wow, what a incredible achievement. So tell us your journey from corporate P&C roles at Uber and REA Group to founding 3 of your own ventures. How did that story unfold for you, Deepak?
Yeah, it is quite a story when you put it that way. I think, like a lot of us, I started in traditional work, like most of us do, trying to do good HR work inside systems that aren't always set up for it. So across global roles in tech, heavily changing businesses, I got to work on some incredible things, which you mentioned, like, moving engagement, M&A, integrating businesses without blowing up cultures, building inclusion strategies that held up under pressure. But what the pattern I kept seeing was that the biggest problems weren't capability problems, there were more decision problems. Leaders often knew when things were broken, but they didn't act. So I stepped out to build something where I could take direct action at that level. Less policy, more impact. And so now I run a portfolio across 3 brands, all focused on one thing: to make work actually work.
Great. So, look, you clearly got an entrepreneurial streak. So, was there a specific moment where you thought to yourself, I can't just do this inside of one company anymore. I've got to step out and democratize it almost and, make yourself available and be there for multiple businesses?
It's a good question. And for me, it didn't start with a dramatic moment. It actually started out of frustration. So I'd finished a great contract. I stepped into what was a non existent job market. In reality, I gave myself about 6 months. I thought it would take 3, still got nowhere. And at the same time, I had a lot of people telling me to start my own thing, do this, do that. So I had a great group of, I guess, people influenced me around me. Then one day someone asked me, can I help them with a project? And I did. But at the same time, I had to register an ABN so I could get paid. So from that, I thought, can I build a brand and something out of this? And that was it. It was simply a first step. There was no real grand plans, just a step forward, then another one and another one.
Well, it sounds like you've got a fairly decent and solid reputation for people to actually just organically reach out to you without even an ABN. So, that's a good start.
Yeah, yeah. And, sometimes there's a bit of luck and there's privilege involved as well. So I think I just recognized it and ran with it.
And so, out of everything that you've built, out of these 3 businesses that you've done already and seems to be going really well for you, what are the thing you're most proud of at the moment?
This is a hard question to answer. And I think professionally, it's not really a single project. For me, what I'm most proud of is a pattern. So over the last few years, having those opportunities to turn messy, high stakes situations into clarity and action, that's what matters. So whether it was that story of lifting engagement, layering the impact of engagement over other business data, reducing attrition, or helping a leader make the call they've been avoiding for 6 months, and then also taking that impact more recently into the ecosystem that I've built myself. I think what I'm proud of is that the work that actually changed things. So it's not really one thing, and it's more about how people feel and helping that business operate in that feeling.
Listen, there's no better feeling, having a tech startup myself, there's no better feeling seeing the impact you can have, the positive impact on someone's
Yeah.
life. And, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears involved in running a company. And so, that's quite rewarding, surely, for you as well, right?
Yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. Like, I would never look back. Yes, it's hard. Yes, there's a lot of times where I've struggled to make ends meet. And I've, gone a few periods of time where, oh, I haven't sent out an invoice, or I haven't been able to do this, or where am I going to get the next piece of work from? But through that persistence, but also realizing what makes you great, and sometimes breaking down yourself a little bit
Yeah.
to create focus, it's an exciting process, and you get better for it. I'm so much better for it.
So talking about focus, right? We've got your HR ventures, Mission and Rhythm, PeopleStack, and Just Sing Out. Each one tackles a fairly different gap. So what is that one single thread that connects them? What's that focus that
Yeah.
ultimately you're trying to fix in the profession?
Yeah, it's a good question because, from the outside looking in, it can be, is Deepak stretching himself too far, trying to do everything? But in reality, they're all solving the same problem from different angles. So what I mean by that, in, traditional HR, I feel we've overcomplicated things. We've turned it into too many frameworks, dashboards, policy, policing, procedure, and almost lost the point a little bit. So my through line with all my work is simple: great experiences for our business and community through great experiences for our people. And each of those tackles it slightly differently. So, mission rhythm, the work is at leadership level and system level, connecting culture to what matters to the business. PeopleStack helps those early stage teams build their employee experience with the same intentionality as their customer experience. And then Just Sing Out is almost on the other side, and it supports individuals when the system breaks. So I think simply different entry points, but all the same mission to make work actually work.
I like that because even in some of the work that we do, we focus on three concentric circles, which is me, my team, my business. And ultimately, the approach is the same, but it just has a
Mhm.
slightly different focus because, individuals require a different level of support compared to your exec team or compared to a department. What are some of the differences you see in terms of the work that you focus on individuals versus, call it, that more leadership team?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll work backwards. So the work I do with individuals is more of a coaching piece. Yes, there is some leadership coaching in my other work, some guidance and how to sometimes tackle a tough situation or get through it or drive change. But what I do with Just Sing Out is most simply, the best way I can describe it is pre-legal workplace coaching. So what I saw is there's a gap. And I've had people come to me over the years for this type of work. Like, I'm in a tough situation. I think I've been unfairly dismissed. I'm going through a HR process that I don't understand. And they were stressed out of their brains. And either they weren't ready for legal representation, it was out of reach, or they weren't sure what to do. So that coaching came from people coming to me firstly, and then realizing maybe there's something I can do more in this space and allow me to do some pro bono work, but also productize what's important. So more simply, this coaching is to give people a place to think clearly before they act. And what I try
Mhm.
to do is help them understand what's happening, what their options are, how to communicate, and how to protect themselves. So the impact for here is simple: less panic, better decisions, and fewer situations are blowing up unnecessarily. And at the same time, I can keep it separate from the work I do with businesses. So there isn't that perceived conflict of interest.
Mhm. Love it. So, okay, so we touched on culture, we touched on some of the development work, and let's talk a little bit now about that engagement, that Gallup engagement that went from the
Yep.
25th percentile to the 75th percentile in 18 months in one of your APAC orgs. We won't say who. So that's a massive move there, right? So walk
Yep.
us through what you actually did. What were the interventions that made the difference? Is there specific ones you can call out, or is it more of a
Yeah.
process?
And I think this is hopefully some great advice for anyone listening. We made the results matter. And what I mean by that is most companies, especially when it comes to engagement, run a survey, eventually share a few slides, nothing tangible really happens, and then everyone moves on. So we broke that mold and did the opposite. So what it did was get the results and shared them back really quickly. So there was no spin, there was no delay, there wasn't a corporate message on top. It was these is what you said. And really importantly, we treated employees like customers. So what we did was we asked, what does this actually mean to you? And what would actually make a real difference to you? We did that both at company level and team level, and then we made sure we owned it. So we ran 6 monthly change sprints. So there was clear actions, visible ownership, and we rewarded progress when things improved, and we rewarded action. If action wasn't taken, those managers potentially weren't up for bonus or certain of those extras. And this wasn't a once a year exercise. It became the part of how we operated. So the shift didn't come from one big initiative. It came from flexing the system so people could actually do their best work. And with the feedback, some of the things we did that mattered most to the people were in APAC, we aligned performance, reward, and expectations across the region. People knew what good looked like again and could simply do that. And what I mean by that is because this business was growing through acquisition, our sales team had 6 different compensation plans for each product they sold. We simplified it so there's one compensation plan, regardless of what you sold. You knew what you could get as a commission, but you could do that easily and not need 6 different spreadsheets and pivot tables to try and work out what you may get home at the end of the month or end of the quarter. The feedback also from, especially from our newer starters, allowed us to rebuild onboarding and that early life cycle moments. And that's where engagement actually starts. And we found even from that, we were able to reduce early career attrition, so that attrition at the first 12 months, by 40%. And lastly, leaders weren't just reviewing the results, they were the ones responsible for changing them. So we gave ownership to their teams. That's what moved the needle. It wasn't the survey, it is what we did with it and the consistency in doing stuff with it and communicating it.
So it sounds like, you got the surveys out, you got quantitative data, you then got some insights from there, you then went and communicated, collaborated, spoke to your staff, call it qualitative data. How long did that whole process take? Because I think sometimes, teams are under pressure to
Mhm.
come up with plans really quickly and start implementing. But this sounds a little bit different. This sounds like it was more holistic. So,
Yeah.
for those listening, what can they set as a benchmark in terms of, okay, what's realistic for this quantitative and qualitative process?
Well, I think this would probably apply to any new change or process within a business. The first time you do it, it can be a bit wishy-washy, but that's okay. It's more about the act of doing it. So, we see the same things when we introduce a new performance process or performance review cycle or whatever it is. It's exactly the same thing. It was about getting people to do it. And that first iteration, it wasn't necessarily about in each team wasn't necessarily having the biggest, strongest goals. It might just be that we want whiteboard markers for all our whiteboards so that we can whiteboard when we want and not walk into a room and go, oh, 7 of the 8 whiteboard markers don't work and get frustrated and no one does anything. So it might have been something as simple as that, but that gave people the tools to do their work properly. But each iteration and the better people got at it and each cycle, it got better and better and better, where then managers had a better idea of what they can own, what the outcome of this was, not just from an engagement, team satisfaction, productivity, but also a bonus point of view was, but they could see the impact of the work. So it was building and building and building and almost that circular sort of, almost building a hurricane, just building those circles concentrically and bigger and bigger.
I love the concept of the low-hanging fruit. Get some early runs on the board, get people to believe in what you're trying to do so that, there's buy-in, right? Ultimately,
Yeah.
it's changing their work environment, and I really like the idea of them being the owners, and it doesn't just get lumped with HR. Hey, we're trying to change your ways of work. Hey, we're trying to change your culture. So
Yep.
when some of these activities, initiatives, tasks were presented to the managers or the department heads, Were there some that bought into it more than others? And how did you corral the champions to influence others that might not quite be there? How did you tackle that problem?
I think at the start you needed exec buy-in and they had to drive that message. So there was a lot of time spent helping them understand what they needed to do. And that didn't come from a board meeting and a PowerPoint presentation. This is your role. It came from a lot of one-on-one conversations. Even before going into that board meeting, it was understanding which exec would be the influencers and may challenge, but maybe bring on side and having those side conversations so they understood. So when you got into the meeting, the one that was most likely to challenge would be saying, hey, I actually spoke to Deepak already. I agree this is the best way forward. And so starting that process from the top, but starting that process with those, bringing the right people in at the right times and then layering it down. But then, especially that first couple of times, it did take pulling people for a few people across the line, but we had to do it. And sometimes that's half the hard work, and that's the bit that frustrates you. But you've got to bring people across the line because as a business, we only succeed as a team. It's not about one group that does really well, another group that does it. In the end, the business doesn't succeed that way. So we had to sometimes drag a few people across the line, kicking and screaming. But once again, when they started seeing the outcomes of it, it became a lot easier. And then if the second time around they didn't do it, it was a bit easier to say, hey, we dragged you across the line last time. This is what's going to happen if you don't do it this time. Either there's going to be impact on your team, there's going to be impact on your performance as a leader. So there's consequences, but also reward. So yes, it was work, most simply, but we got there. And sometimes to get something started, you do have to push a little bit because it's a forced relationship. It has to be intentional. So it can't just be like, this is a new process, here's a policy, good luck and goodbye, and move on to the next thing. It doesn't matter if no one does it. So
I think your comment around there needs to be buy-in from the top is really important. I know we always say that, but ultimately, if they don't sing from the same hymn sheet, there's pockets of the business that simply just won't come along for the journey. So when you've seen that done well, what's the role of the CEO in making sure that exec group pulls the same direction?
Well, the CEO has to lead. That's the role of, well, all of us as leaders, firstly, but they have to take the lead. And sometimes they have to be the first one to do that. So part of that process was to say, when we came to sharing those results, but also getting feedback, we're actually going to schedule the CEO and exec meeting first and get that off happening really quickly. Because then when the exec went through that process, they were like, actually, this was pretty good. I got to share. There's some actions from it. It's much easier for me to lead this with my team then
Mm,
because I've seen it in action.
mm.
Sometimes you need to do it first. So it was really focused like that. But also we did focus on some of those teams that we thought might be a little bit tougher to say, okay, this pocket of our product team or our engineering team or whatever team it is, let's get them on board so they do it first. And then who are the champions? So it was your P&C team. So make sure the P&C team are going through this process early and they understand it so they can guide, explain it, and sit in on some of those conversations if need be.
Okay, switching gears a little bit. So
Yep.
PeopleStack, it's built
Yes.
for pre-Series A startups. Um, what's the people problem at that specific stage that nobody else is solving? Why did you build it around that specific, ICP?
Yeah, so PeopleStack came one also out of seeing a lot of frustration. Early stage founders are incredible at product, their growth, their vision, but the people side, it's often quite reactive. They don't touch it unless something's on fire. There's a lot of fast hiring without any structure. They sometimes on board very loosely or don't. And then you see when you get to that 20 or 30 people, things really quickly fall off. And then you're trying to fix it under pressure. So PeopleStack exists to get ahead of that. And we give founders and those early stage scaling teams their minimal viable people function. Things like hiring, onboarding, performance, ways of working, so that they don't have to clean up culture later and they build it properly from the start.
Love it. Clean up culture later, preventing all of that. So culture can be quite a nebulous topic, a kind of confusing topic. So, what does building culture actually mean to you? So not the textbook answer, but in practice.
I think most simply, most businesses and early stage businesses are very clear of the customer journey. those key touch points, whether it is recruitment, acquisition, onboarding, growing that customer, even to the stage of offboarding them and hopefully getting them to be referrals in the market for you. There's a very clear process and steps and where those impact is. What all we simply do to show is that the employee journey and the customer journey are exactly the same journeys, exactly the same steps, and you can design it with the same intentionality so that each affects the other and everyone knows how they support the customer, which is most important in any business.
So you've got these different steps from, when the employee starts to when they leave, and you're obviously being intentional around how you built the culture or the way they work, their environment. So what are some of the telltale signs in these steps that the culture is not aligned with the business strategy? Are there some early warning signals that people leaders should watch out for?
There is, there is. I'm going to put my thinking cap on for a second with that one, just so I can articulate that one well. But there's a few. So I think what we need to think about, especially with culture and those really early warning signs, is firstly, even before we get onto that, how are we going to be intentional with culture? So it means designing work that actually happens. So, don't think about values and not the posters. It's about decision making, how feedback is given, what gets rewarded and what gets ignored. So culture is always there. The question is more whether it's intentional or accidental. So I think those early warning signs in particular for that misaligned culture, what I see is things like slow decision making, leaders saying one thing but doing another, high performers getting really frustrated. The larger the organization, you see more and more disconnection between the layers. So there might be a great relationship with the line manager, but a huge disconnection with the manager above that. But I think the favorite one I see, I don't know if favorite's the right word, is lots of activity, everyone's busy, but no progress. Everyone's doing stuff, but no one's doing stuff that matters, or it's stuff that's going in 7 different directions.
I think tied to that is, you were talking about being intentional about the culture that you have versus what you're trying to create. I think it's when that misalignment for me is when leaders can't articulate how we're being intentional about our culture, right? I think that's a really big thing for me is not being able to articulate what are we focusing on? How do we actually define our culture? And is that the right direction where we're heading towards? Does that kind of
Yeah.
resonate with you and what you've seen when culture goes really well or really bad?
I love that point because in reality, everyone sells or everything we do communicates, and we need to communicate. And our role as leaders is almost to act as that layer to decipher what comes from above us and make sure it has impact to the teams around us. So, very importantly, it is to communicate, but communicate clearly so that our audience understands what we need to do with that.
Great. I think communication is the number one step, really. Without it, how can we actually be intentional about our culture that we're creating anyway?
Yeah.
So, look, shifting gears again, you mentioned hiring and you mentioned about, onboarding and, potential turnover. So, have you ever made a bad hire and what did it teach you about people and culture?
Yes, most simply, of course. And I think I'm sure most of us have. I think looking back, the mistake wasn't necessarily the hire, but firstly, how I made that hire and then holding on too long. So I think I've learned that misalignment rarely fixes itself, or it just doesn't. And the longer you wait, the more it costs everyone, the team member, yourself, and in the end, your customers as well. So I think now I'm much quicker to firstly address it because often it can be rectified, but also call it out for what it is. In the end, it's a relationship, and sometimes some relationships don't work. Breakups are shit, but they don't have to be bad. We can deal with that in the right way and say, hey, sometimes the environment, the connection isn't the right one. It doesn't mean anyone's a bad worker or not good or anything like that. This just this relationship at this time didn't work. So it's about be willing to make a decision either way, but start with trying to address it and address it clearly first, because often it's just a misalignment and I didn't realize that. Okay, let's work together to do the right thing.
So, how can organizations and those in the startup environment maybe trying to hire their first person, or maybe someone's trying to hire their 100th person and still can't make up their decision as to who they should bring on board? What are some of the things hiring managers, people leaders can do from the onset to try and avoid or minimize bad hiring?
I think be clear across the hiring team. So often in a process, you might have a few stages of interviews and a few people involved. So firstly, get alignment what good looks like across each of those people, because everyone has to be on the same page. But also get clear almost on paper what they need to do. If you're not clear on what good looks like in 3, 6, 12 months, then no one's going to win. And yes, especially in early stage businesses, shifting goalposts, things pivot, things like that. But very importantly, if you're going to bring someone new into the business, they're there to achieve something and do something and shift the needle. So what is it they're going to do? It might be 3 dot points, but if you can start with that and be really clear on that, it's much easier to look for that versus this laundry list that often you see on job ads and job descriptions that there's, 17 different things. And even people reading it tune out after the first 5 dot points. So make it impactful and focus on the impact. Then you can dig deeper and talk a bit deeper. Yeah, some of the work may involve this. What is the experience of that? But I think to bring it back, be really clear on what good looks like through all the decision makers and define your process. So what does an interview look like? How do we feedback? How do we make sure that each interviewer isn't asking the same question again? Or if they need to, why are they doing that? So we build a strong story, we can make a more informed choice.
So if you go back to some of the comments, we were talking about engagement and how you shifted engagement and, the reasons why people leave, a lot of the time is misalignment, not only from what they're supposed to be doing, but from a cultural or work environment perspective. So how can
Mm.
people, leaders navigate, call it the culture fit, the team fit, the personality fit? How do we go about that?
So I think from internally, firstly, understand what makes you great, and that is your culture. What does good look like? But also, what are the parts of the culture that some people may struggle with? It might be ambiguity or that changing direction. I worked with a client once, and they came to me and said, "Hey, this is a great role, really powerful, but to be honest, the CEO's an idiot." Maybe those words are a bit nicer than what they said, but we almost put that in the ad to say that the leadership you work with will be extremely hard. And we changed the words a little bit, still kept it true to them, had a little bit of fun with it. And yes, that probably got rid of, 60% of people who would normally apply. But the people who did apply walked in with eyes wide open. And also, we could then drive, can you handle this environment? This is what's going to be hard about it. And this is what's going to be great about it. And the team were able to find someone really good. And I think 3 years later, they're still there. And the culture has improved and some of those things have changed. But, and I still in touch with them, and they keep saying that that clarity at the start set them up for success, not just through the interview process and that application process, but from day one. So they knew what to expect. They were prepared for it, and it wasn't a sudden, surprise punch in the face type thing.
I think that realistic job preview is one side of the coin where this is what you're going to be doing, this is what you can expect. And then there's the realistic work environment preview where exactly what you're talking about. What's the team like? What's the leader like? What's the reporting lines like? So that, they don't work in separate realms. They're actually
Mm.
intertwined. So providing that realistic preview, I think is really important.
Yeah, yeah, and sorry,
Yeah.
keep going, keep going.
No, 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 you're right.
I was going to say, that in the past, I used to do a lot of coaching for people that were out of work and looking for work and transitioning. And it was a more of a physical process where it was less online interviews and things like that, probably showing my age. But that was an important step, understanding the workplace. So some of the advice was get in early, talk to the person that's at the reception desk. How long have you been here? Hey, Deepak, um, how long have you been working here? What do you love? What's really hard? And you start to get some understanding and build some rapport. So even when you walk into the interview, you can go in, hey, I just spoke to Deepak. He says he loves this about working here. Tell me more about it. And you start building that story and that connection a lot earlier. So I'm glad you brought that up because it just, yeah, it jogged that memory.
That's a hot tip. I actually really like that one. So, for anyone listening out there about applying for a job or going for a job interview, maybe even checking out current employees on LinkedIn, what they're
Yeah.
posting, what the messaging is, and maybe even reaching out to existing employees and asking them what it's like to work there. That's a great tip.
Because it's hard out there, we know it's hard for job seekers. I think I saw a stat that for the average number of applications for any job is 242 at the moment applications, which is crazy. So to stand out, firstly, to get to that next stage of an interview, a phone screen, and go further to maybe an interview, do your research, do as much as you can, and dig a bit deeper. Don't do the first thing you can Google or go into your AI and ask the most generic thing. If you dig a bit deeper, you actually build connection. That's what they're trying to see, because most people getting called into an interview can do the job. It's more about building connections so that you're not one of 20 people they interviewed. You're that one person to say, hey, Deepak came into an interview, and afterwards, the person on reception came to me and said, hey, Deepak was really nice. He asked me all these questions. He's
Yeah.
really keen on this. I'm remembered, and my chance to get to the next round is a little bit higher than it was before.
Or even, let's say I'm joining a engineering team or a marketing team and I'm reaching out to team members asking them what it's like. As an employer, I'd remember that person, and
Yeah,
I'd be very keen to also hear what they had to say, what people said about my company.
yeah.
So it's a two-way
It
street.
shows genuine care. And if by chance you get an employer that hates it, it's a huge red flag, and you've missed one. So
Yeah.
you've dodged a bullet there. So I think once again we say to be more customer focused, understand the customer. We're doing exactly the same process our marketing teams do, our customer experience teams do. We should be thinking with that same sort of hat on.
Love it. So shifting gears again a little bit. So
Yep.
HR has traditionally been seen as, a cost center. Have you seen that perception shift over the last few years? And if so, what still needs to change?
Firstly, yes, it is still very much seen as a cost center in a lot of places, but there is a shift happening, and that's through more voices speaking out to say, this is what we need to change. And that's also internally as well. So the best organizations that I see people as a performance lever and not a cost to manage. And that is very clear across all the teams. I think we've all worked in a business where the sales team will, stick it to like the people team and say, you're a cost center, whatever else. But in the best business, everyone knows that everyone has a role to play. But I think also at the same time, that says what still needs to change has a lot to do with accountability. So I think most simply, if people outcomes aren't tied to business outcomes, HR will always struggle for credibility. So what we do has to have impact.
I agree. And I think some of the people teams that I've seen that outperform or that are really high performing, they're also very much commercial minded, very much data driven, commercial
Mm.
minded. Would you agree with that? Or have you seen other things that can equally contribute?
Yeah, exactly. We have to be extremely strategic. So to that point, as a team, we have to stop waiting to be invited. Our role is to understand the business, understand the customer and the people in the business, and really importantly, how that business makes money. So that in turn, we bring insight and not updates. We come with solutions and not problems. And we're willing to challenge. And really importantly, we just do it. We take action. Often, you can ask for permission afterwards, but sometimes you need to go and do it. I think as HR teams and HR leaders, if we're only servicing leadership, we're
Yeah.
already behind. We're the ones who need to start shaping the direction.
Shaping your destiny. I love it. All right, Deepak, last question for you. If you could go
Okay.
back in time, what are the three pieces of advice you would give your younger self about HR, work, people, and culture?
Okay, three things. So one, start my own thing earlier, whether it's a side hustle, a business, just something, just start it earlier. Two, say things earlier. What I've found, especially for me, is most issues don't need more time. They need more honesty and willingness to have the conversation. Don't wait for things to be perfect. Start that conversation early. And three, really importantly, for what I am now, success has nothing to do with a job title. It's the life that you're building around it. And the work I do gives me more freedom to be more present with my family, reduce some of that stress, and do the things that actually matter outside of work.
I love it. That was a great piece of advice. Fantastic. I'd really like your point about being proactive too, right? In terms of doing your own thing, because it's not just doing your own thing in terms of starting a business. Exactly what you said before, which is HR people not waiting to be asked, but being proactive, starting now, starting early, talking early. I really enjoyed this, Deepak. So thanks for that.
Yeah, me too. Great questions. Great questions. You put me on the spot with a few of them, but I loved it. I loved it. Thank you.